فكلي واشربي وقري عينا فإما ترين من البشر أحدا فقولي إني نذرت للرحمن صوما.
Hey everyone, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Yunus Mirza and welcome to the Islamic Mary podcast. So for today I want to speak about my edited volume that I'm revising with John Kaltner on the Bible and the Qur'an. And part of that work is to go back and to review. So we're coming out with a second edition soon, and we're going through the various entries and seeing what new literature has been published, but also going back to the medieval and the Islamic tradition to see what they've said about these various prophets. And one of the prophets that's always fascinating me is Yusuf or Joseph. And this is probably because the name Joseph or Yusuf is very similar to that of Yunus, right? So if you think of Yusuf and then Yunus, the actual first syllable is the same. And oftentimes people call me Yusuf because they're more familiar with that name. That name is more commonly used throughout the world than that of Yunus. And the story of Joseph Yusuf is so fascinating because it's the only continuous surah or story within the Qur'an. And it also has this narrative from the beginning of the end that's really captivating, interesting. It talks about stories of betrayal, of temptation, of seduction, of patience, of power, of distribution, of sibling rivalry, relationships with parents. So there's this surah, this chapter is so rich with so many different themes. And part of my work within the volume is to go into the climaxes al-Anbiya, the stories of the prophet literature, and find interesting tales and unique narrations that make the story come alive. And one of the things I've been working on, or one of the authors I've been working on, is that of Ibn Kathir. And going through his stories of the prophets has been so interesting because part of what he does is that he goes to the Quranic verses, also related prophetic hadith or traditions, but he also occasionally says, وَقَالَ أَهْلُ الْكِتَابِ. So he says, this is what the people of the book say. Now, this is very different than other authors, such as Tha'alabi or Kasai, who simply will quote the Islamic tradition, they'll quote tales, but they don't always cite their sources. So sometimes they are quoting biblical traditions, but they don't say, the people of the book say this, or the Jews and Christians believe this. Rather, they say this on their own, and they sometimes will narrate this from Muslim or Islamic sources, or they won't even cite their sources at all. Now, when I look through Ibn Kathir's Qisas al-Anbiya, stories of the prophets, he oftentimes is polemical, but there's moments that he's insightful and his analysis is really interesting and unique. So one example is the dream that Joseph has in the beginning of the story. And I've read the Genesis version, I've read the Qur'anic version so many times, but it's always interesting to read someone else's take and comparison between the two. Now, Ibn Kathir, he notices that in the beginning of the story, that in the Bible, Joseph actually will go to his brothers and tell them the dream. However, in the Quranic version, he only tells his father. And this has given me a lot of thought. Why is that? Why is it in Genesis, Joseph is actually going and speaking to his brothers and then making them more jealous, while in the Qur'an, he only tells his dream to his father? So let's go ahead and read these two different versions together and see why they may be similar and different. So in the Bible, the story starts and says, Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. So the story starts out in Genesis where Jacob, Yaqub, is in love with Joseph. He is his favorite child, and he goes out his way. He makes this ornate robe for him. And this creates this jealousy, right? Something that maybe we could all relate to, or this rivalry between these brothers. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, Listen to this dream I had. We are binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. So once again, here it sets up the context nicely, where Joseph is already favored. He's already someone who's the object of jealousy, and his dream makes his brothers even more jealous and more upset with him, that somehow Joseph has this delusion, this dream, that they will all bow down to him. And then Joseph has another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. And when he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So this is once again remarkable that there's actually two dreams, and both the dreams allude to the same thing, that the brothers will actually come and they will bow down to Joseph. They will speak to his exemplary nature and how God favored him over them. And this once again makes them more angry, upset, and jealous. When we look at the Quranic version of the same story, we see that the Qur'an starts off in a different way. So the Qur'an is not necessarily interested in Genesis or the origins of the people of Israel. There's more emphasis of trying to speak to the Prophet Muhammad and his community, as well as speak to the powerful nature of the Arabic Qur'an, and also the morals and lessons that people can take out of it, whether they may be of patience or of taqwa, of being conscious of God. And the chapter begins and says that these are the verses of scripture that make things clear. We have sent it down as the Arabic Quran so that you people may understand. We tell you, Prophet, the best of stories in revealing this Qur'an to you. Before this, you were one of those who knew nothing about them. So here we see in this introduction that the Qur'an is saying that this is a clear scripture. It's been revealed down, defending those who said it's simply poetry or sorcery. And this is the Arabic Qur'an. So maybe different than the biblical tradition, which is in Hebrew. The Qur'an is explicitly in Arabic, a language that's understood by the people and also known to be eloquent. And it talks to the Prophet Muhammad, saying that we are revealing to you the best stories, right? So this story is supposed to inspire the Prophet Muhammad, especially in the late Meccan era where his community was being persecuted and tortured. And this is a new story for him, right? Something he did not necessarily know before. So Joseph, or Yusuf, said to his father, Father, I dreamed of 11 stars and the sun and the moon. I saw them all bowed down before me. And he replied, My son, tell your brothers nothing of this dream, or they may plot to harm you. Satan is man's sworn enemy. This is about how your Lord will choose you, teach you to interpret dreams, and perfect his blessing on you and the house of Jacob, just as he perfected it early on your forefathers, Abraham and Isaac, has the knowledge to decide. So what's really fascinating here is that the story begins with the dream. So Yusuf, he has this dream, and he goes to his father and tells him of this dream. So if we remember the biblical version, he goes and tells his brothers, which makes them even more angry and jealous of him. But here he goes only to his father, and in this kind of intimate setting, he tells his father what the dream is all about. Now, his father is wise, and he is aware of the dynamics between his children, and he tells him a piece of advice. He says, don't tell your brothers anything of this dream, or they may plot to harm you, right? So he's worried about the safety and sanctity of his son, and he knows that his other sons are jealous of him, and they may want to harm him if there's some type of sentiment or feeling that Joseph feels he's better than them. And then he makes this interesting comment here that Satan is man's sworn enemy. And this isn't found in the biblical story, where it's seen in the Quran that Satan is someone who causes dissension among different people. And he is someone that is trying to sow seeds of enmity and animosity between the brothers. And this is a constant theme that we see repeated throughout the story of Yusuf. And he explains to him that God has chosen you, you will interpret dreams, and that you're part of this prophetic family. You have fathers of Abraham and Isaac and God has knowledge over all things. When you look and compare the two scriptures here, you see this different emphasis, right? You see in the first one, in the biblical in Genesis, this real strong emphasis of the jealousy, right? Really building up this idea of the envy that they have and that they want to eventually harm Joseph, that Joseph is seen as thinking he's better than his brothers and he wears this robe and Jacob prefers him. Well, in the Qur'anic version, there is this emphasis on this relationship with his father, that he goes to his father, he tells him this dream in private, in secret, and then his father gives him this piece of advice. Now, it's really interesting that in the Quranic story of Joseph, there's only two people who are mentioned explicitly, right? There are a lot of different characters that are named in the different literatures. You have Zuleika, the one who tempts Joseph. You have Potiphar, who is the wife of Zuleika. You have the Pharaoh. But the ones who are named are only Yusuf and Jacob or Yaqub. So you have this real strong connection of this father and child relationship where they speak to one another, give each other advice. And this appears later in the chapter itself. Then you have the idea of Joseph who goes to his father and he tells them, welcome to Egypt. You'll all be safe here, God willing. So once again, this is when Joseph has been redeemed. Now he is part of the family of when Yusuf is the head of households, and he is someone who is respected and has power throughout the land. And he took them up to his throne, and they all bowed down before him. And he said, Father, this is the fulfillment of that dream I had long ago. My Lord has made it come true and has been gracious to me. He released me from prison and brought you here from the desert. After Satan sowed discord between me and my brothers, my Lord is most subtle in achieving what he will. He alone has the knowledge to decide. So what's remarkable here is this idea that Joseph now is in power. He is the head of the storehouses. And now he realizes the fulfillment of that dream. The moon, the sun and the moon and the 11 planets are all bowing down to him. And he goes to his father initially and says, this is the fulfillment of the dream. And then God has been truly gracious to me. So once again, to conclude, we see there is a purpose of each story, that the story of Genesis is one of focusing on the jealousy and the enmity and the origins of the people of Israel. While we see in the Quran, there is this focus on patience, the idea of the grace of God, being conscious, and this kind of intimacy, this really strong relationship between parent and child. And lastly, we see this strong connection. And one of the best, or one of my favorite verses within that chapter is when Yusuf goes to his father at the end and says, Father, this is the dream I had long ago. Because throughout the narrative, Yusuf is interpreting the dreams of various figures, right? The dreams of those in prison. And then he also interprets the dream of the king, of the Pharaoh. But then he's not able to interpret his own dream, right? And when I teach, I often say it's easier to solve other people's problems than yourself, right? You may have a vision, or you might have a sense or inkling of something, and things are unclear. There's mystery in this world. But we like to solve other people's problems, right? And say this is what's going to happen. And at the end, Yusuf, Joseph, all the dots connect, and he realizes that the dream he had so long ago when he was a boy has come to be realized. So thanks once again for listening to the Islamic Mary podcast. I encourage you to order my book, The Islamic Mary, Maryam Through the Centuries. I've got the opportunity to speak in different places, just coming back from Sarajevo, Bosnia. Also, several reading clubs and reading circles have reached out, and they are interested in engaging the book further. And I encourage you to maybe start a reading circle of the book and to discuss it among your friends and family. I would encourage you to subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. We see that there's increased listenership on all the different platforms. Also, encourage your friends, students, and colleagues to listen to the podcast. in summertime, people are traveling, and it's a great opportunity to listen to something while you're in the car or on the plane. We're reaching almost 100 episodes of the Islamic Mary podcast, and we have a library of monologues, book reviews, as well as Quranic commentary. And you can always review this podcast, which helps other people find it and encourages them to listen to it. And last, you can visit my website. I've done some renovations there, and you can see more of my articles and blogs, as well as my various publications. And you can also join my newsletter, where you'll be updated on the Islamic Mary speaking tour, as well as this podcast. Thanks so much, and take care.